Hello guys, I want to tell you about a strange experience I had some years back. At the time I was working for a company that required a 30-minute to 1-hour commute to Nairobi city center. Then I board a second vehicle and go for another 20 to 30 minutes out of the city center. Meaning on a day when there's no jam, I'm looking at 1.5 hours from home to my workplace via the city center. At the time, our public transport vehicles, popularly known as matatus, were few, thus making the commute experience nightmarish. Basically, few vehicles and many commuters. So during peak hours, especially evening after work, the jam and the queues at the terminus were not something we looked forward to. For example, considering that by the time I leave the office at 5, it means that I would get to the city center at around 5:30. That would mean I would have to queue for 1.5 hours for me to get a matatu, which means I would get to board the matatu at 7 p.m. Worse still, ni kukinyesha. You know how Nairobi gets when it rains. The cars snarl up, unexplained jams, and generally a wet, cold, and uncomfortable weather. Meaning if normal times of getting home is 8 p.m., on rainy days you're looking at getting home at around 10 p.m. if you're lucky, but most people would get home at 12 midnight. To avoid this 1.5 hour matatu queue, sometimes I would opt to sit in a restaurant at around 5:30 when I get to the city center. Then I'd wait and leave the restaurant at around 7 p.m. so that when I get to the bus terminus, I'll find the queues have reduced and hopefully more vehicles at the stage. On this day, I'm not sure if it rained or not. All I remember is that it was one of those days when I decided to wait at the restaurant at around 5:30. So I was leaving the restaurant at around 8. But unfortunately, there were still no matatus at our terminus. So I decided to go check for a bus, and the bus for our route was also not available. But since I didn't want to continue staying in the city center beyond 9 p.m. in the night, I opted to use another bus which used to use the same road, but it was a different route. Meaning, we would use the same road which I normally use going home, but at some point it would divert into an estate. So by the time I was boarding it, it was around 8:30. We left town, but in the darkness, in the confusion, the bus took a turn too fast before I could alight. As panic set in, I rushed to the door and requested the bus crew to allow me to alight at a stage which would allow me to go back to the main road and hopefully get a bus for my route. They agreed, and 5 minutes later they stopped and I alighted at a particular stage. Problem was, the distance to the main road from where I had alighted was like 10 to 15 minutes from where I was, and there was this empty, desolate field I had to cross before getting to the main road. But worst of all is that the field was known to be horrible. Thugs and drug peddlers used to hide there, and people would be attacked, mugged, or even killed, especially at night. So here I am. It's 9 p.m., one of those very dark nights, and I have to walk through a dark, desolate field in a strange neighborhood. I looked around in the hope of seeing someone I could walk with, but I realized I was all alone. Which wasn't surprising considering that this was a dangerous spot. At 9 p.m., I didn't expect anyone. Of course, today there's a mall and businesses have been developed along that area. So nowadays it's a bit safer. And then again, today we can Uber. Back then there was nothing like Uber. So here I am all alone. I gathered courage and I began walking, praying for protection as I walked. When I got right in the middle of the field, I saw this bunch of loud men walking towards where I had come from while I was heading to where they had come from. Meaning, at some point we will have to cross paths. The men were like 7 to 10 men. As we walked on, they became more visible because of the lights at the main road. I was able to see their silhouettes, and as such, I noticed they were carrying crude weapons, clubs and machetes. In that moment, I realized that these were thugs probably going to rob a place. After all, the field was known to harbor thugs. So I panicked and I just thought, Kwisha mimi. There I was. I wondered, do I go back? But I knew if I turn, they might sense that I'm running away from them, then they might run after me. Yani either way, at some point we'd have to walk past each other, and at that point I felt so helpless because I could see these were clearly thugs, no question. Halafu kwa field, tuko peke yetu. Yani ushawahi kuwa in such a hopeless situation, hadi instead of asking God to save you, you tell him to give you the strength to endure the attack. Have you ever made such a prayer? That's the kind of prayer I made because I was like, there's no way out of this. I was in such a hopeless situation. I could see this was an impending attack because of what I had heard about this field. So I continued walking on, very scared, trembling, praying as I walked. I was just in a very hopeless situation. As I walked on, I suddenly noticed this man who was ahead of me, walking towards the main road where I was going. He was in a white robe. sort of the kind Muslim men wear, you know, the longish top or shirt, and then there are white trousers, those ones. That's what he was wearing, and he had a turban wrapped around his head. My terror was slightly interrupted by a feeling of relief, since now I knew I wasn't alone. So my goal became that I need to walk faster and reach him. Then hopefully if these men see that I'm not alone, they might choose not to attack, or at least the man will protect me. So I hastened my pace, but for some reason I couldn't catch up with him. As in, our distance remained a constant 10 meters no matter how hard I tried to catch up. Finally, the armed men reached where he was. They passed the turban man with no drama and proceeded towards me. At this point, my legs felt like rubber in total, complete fear, total terror. And I'm furiously praying to God to give me endurance, since I was sure that an attack was about to occur. Then the men who were talking anxiety reached where I was, and guess what? They passed me. As in, they literally passed me. And they continued their chatter. They didn't stop. They didn't do anything. They just passed me. These people, I can bet on that, they did not see me at all. They just passed as if they had not met anyone. It's as if they were the only ones in that field, meaning like they continued their chatter, they continued their talking. The way, you know, when you meet someone, if you're many of you, maybe two of you would sort of move apart so that you create space for someone to pass. They didn't do that. They just passed as if they were the only ones in that field. They passed, like literally they passed. They didn't talk to me. So I was there like, what has just happened? I was relieved, I was shocked, I was confused, I had so many questions, but above everything else, I just started thanking God in relief. My hopeless prayer turned into thanksgiving, and I continued half running, half walking, so as to catch up with the guy in white ahead of me. For some reason, I still couldn't catch up with him, but 5 minutes later, we got to the main road safely, and as I still said a thanksgiving prayer, I boarded a matatu and headed home. So at that time, I remember we were living with my dad and my sister, and because of what I had done, honestly, I was like, how could I just board a bus that was not going in my direction? So I was feeling a bit embarrassed, and then of course I knew if I tell my dad, he will probably zusha and ask me, why would you do that? Why would you take us the wrong bus? You know, so there are all those questions. So for some reason, I didn't want to say anything about what had happened. That was one. Then number two, I'm sure you've so far noticed when something traumatizing or extremely shocking happens to me, I sort of bury it into my subconscious and I sort of try to forget about it. If you've listened to my past testimonies, you'll notice that. So a few years later, we were just having a conversation with friends, and we were basically talking about the way God protects us in strange ways. You know, there's this feeling whereby maybe you use a particular matatu, or you've seen a matatu, and then the Holy Spirit just tells you don't use that matatu, and then you let that vehicle go, that PSV go, and then later you hear maybe that vehicle had an accident or something. So we're just discussing those stories. And that point is when I explained to people about the man in white. And as I was describing him, that is when it hit me. This man appeared from nowhere, literally. Because if you recall, I told you before I started walking into the field, I looked around to check if there was anyone we could walk with so that that person acts like protection for me. I am sure I was alone because I remember looking around. So if this person had come from behind, shouldn't there have been a moment where he passed me, like I would see this is someone passing me? That didn't happen. The moment I noticed the thugs at the front and I started praying, 1 minute there was no one, the next minute they were there. I can't say I saw the miraculous appearance of them, but all I remember is 1 minute there was no one, the next minute there was someone in front of me. So that was one of the things that I noticed as now I was retelling this story to my friends. Also, remember I told you I tried catching up with him, but I couldn't. That was weird because I was half running, half walking to make sure that I catch up with him, but for some reason I couldn't catch up with him. Also, remember I told you this was a very dark night. It was one of those nights where there's just darkness. The only thing I was able to see was a silhouette of this man coming because of the light of the main road, which was like 10 minutes away from me at the time. But for some reason, I was able to see the attire of this person very clearly. I was able to see that's a turban, that's a Muslim kind of, robe, the kind of white robe that our Muslim brothers wear. I was able to see all that. Why was I able to see all that and I was unable to see anything else? Sure, I had heard about stories about people who had been saved from danger by angels. So as I was narrating this story to my friends, I was like, had I been saved by an angel? I will never know. All I know is the group of thugs whom I met that night, they did not see me. They did not see me at all. Also, when I got to the stage, when I look back, when I think about it, I don't remember us getting to the stage with that man in white. Meaning, after the danger had passed, I think this man disappeared out of just the same way he had appeared. He appeared from the blue, he disappeared from the blue, because I can't remember us getting to the stage together. Meaning, as we neared the main road, he just vanished. But this is the craziest thing about this incident. It happened many years ago. But guess what? I still remember it as if it was yesterday. Like even right now, I'm narrating that story. The pictures are just coming back to me like very clearly. In my opinion, God sent me an angel in the form of a turban-clad man whose job was to completely blind the thugs whom I met that night. And at this point, I want to continue emphasizing prayer. Always pray wherever you are. Pray for those you love, for yourself. God will send people or angels to take care of you. I have heard about people in white appearing and saving people, but it has never crossed my mind that it had happened to me until that day years later when we were discussing the crazy mugging in that field. I hope the experience has taught you something about prayer while in hopeless situations. Please remember to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so that you don't miss any of my uploads. I'm Faith. Stay safe.